Hello and welcome to All Church Sunday School. My name is Shannon Moore, and you will see that today I do not have Renee Hoke with me. Who are you?
Hello, I'm Reverend Jessica Vacketta, and I am glad to be here as a guest on All Church Sunday School.
I'm glad that you're here. It's okay if I call you JV.
Of course you can call me JV. No, I want you to call me Reverend Jessica. No.
So, as we're recording this, Renee and Russ are with our middle school youth on a mission pilgrimage to Houston.
Yes.
Or mission service trip.
Service learning trip. Yes, serving
Always
and learning.
Get those.
You know, they're interchangeable.
Trying to get the language right. But we have our friend here to represent Renee.
It looks like Renee.
Even sitting on a pillow.
Yeah.
So
I can see it in the eyes.
So Renee is with us in spirit. And
I feel her presence.
But thank you for filling in. And we are right in the middle of a study of the book of James, the letter of James. And today we're going to be looking at the third chapter. Okay. So here on All Church Sunday School, we like to jump right in. So if you will start, we're going to be looking first at the first 12 verses. Will you read that for us?
All right, I will do that.
I'll jump in too sometimes.
Okay. Just cut me off when you need to. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. Bridle. Oh, that's right. A horse. Yeah,
there you go.
I'm not a horse person. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits.
How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell.
Whew. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed, and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it, we bless the Lord and Father, and with it, we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh.
Whew. So already, right in these first 12 verses of this chapter, I mean, that's the thing about James. He jumps in and just keeps on going. I mean, he started in chapter 1 and he hadn't let up since. And chapter 3 is just, he's just plowing through. So are you sure you want to teach today?
I'm a little scared.
Can
I just step away?
James's warning. But it did make me think about what is it that makes a good teacher?
Is this a question I get to answer?
Yeah.
You know, when I look back on some of my favorite teachers, I think a couple of things. Those that are passionate when teaching. I think great storytellers, whether you're, teaching history or English or even math, but just being passionate and energized about your subject makes a great teacher. I also think listening is a important skill for teaching.
Right.
And hearing those questions.
Yes. Looking back, do you find, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I find that it's the teachers that were hardest that in retrospect were my favorite. I learned the most, or because I think they cared about the subject and they cared about the students. They cared about me.
I think that that's true for me too. I look back on some of my classes, especially in grad school, and people are like, "Oh, that class is so hard," but the teachers were my favorite, and I feel like I did better in those classes because not only does a good teacher like listen and is passionate, but they also, I think, push you. Like they can see what you're capable of, and they're not going to let you settle or slack off.
Right. I remember my second grade teacher was so hard, but I look back now and just think about how much I learned, how much she expected of us, even if, the students who felt they couldn't, or for some reason, she just expected that you would, but not in a condescending way. There's something special about a good teacher.
There is.
But will you read what N.T. Wright says about teaching?
Yes. One hint in the wrong direction and someone else's life, perhaps a whole classroom full of lives, can be sent down the wrong path. How much more is this the case in the church?
Right?
Yeah.
I tell this story quite often, but I have a go ahead.
This just made me think. My sister and I went home recently to visit my parents, and we took my nieces somewhere that she had went on a field trip when she was in a certain grade. I don't know if the teacher would be watching this. I'll just say a certain grade.
Your sister or
my
one
sister.
Of the kids? Okay.
My sister was in elementary school, and she said that she was uncomfortable going to this location because of how her teacher treated her and her other classmates when they were there.
Wow.
So
even now,
it's still triggered like an uncomfortable feeling and bad memories, 25 years later.
And I tell this quite often about a very close friend of mine. We were in Sunday school together and asked a question about forgiveness. And the Sunday school teacher implied that my friend could not be forgiven for a certain thing. And their life took a completely different course from that moment. And that teacher probably has no idea that what was said affected my friend so profoundly.
One hint.
In the wrong direction. Yeah. And so it shows how powerful the tongue is, what we say, how we say it, how powerful that is, which is difficult for all of us.
I don't know what you're talking about, Rev Moore. I have no problems taming my tongue.
But I'm gonna push back. I almost put a picture of you with the word vault on the top of it on our slides today, because I'm going to tell you something. If you tell Rev Vacketta something and say, this is vault, or don't tell this, it will not go anywhere. And I really do appreciate that about you. I was telling somebody that yesterday, as a matter of fact. So you do know how to control your tongue.
Thank you. It's important for me.
Yeah.
People trust you with stuff.
Yeah, so I do want to lift that up. But I love the analogies that he makes of, that little piece of metal in a horse's mouth on the bridle.
The bridle. I'm sorry. I was like, you're like, I don't know horses. Yeah. But yes, now I get that.
Right, so just that little bit of metal, which, rests on its tongue.
Okay.
But I think... I'm not
a
horse
lots
person
of
either.
examples here. So.
But, that's how you guide the horse because of that. And then the ship, I love that image too, just how gigantic a ship can be. And that little rudder,
I understand that one better.
And so just like that, what we say, how we use our tongues in speech, or I would say even sign language or whatever, or writing or whatever. But a lot of times with speaking, it comes out more quickly, I think. But how quickly that can send you in a direction you don't want to go. Ruined relationships, broken promises, first impressions.
Oh, yes.
You can't take those back. No. And so it's really important. It's like setting a fire Careers and governments have toppled over.
Even without words, with first impressions, like the way you look at someone or don't look at someone.
Right. And then add on to that a misspoken word or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Of course, wrong is subjective in some cases, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like a little world of its own, the tongue, James says. Even James is sort of calling back the teachings of Jesus here. Jesus said that what comes out of our mouths is a sign of what lives within us, right? And what do you think about the example that he gives about fig trees not bearing olives and vines not bearing figs? How does that speak to you?
I had to think about it for a second as I'm like trying to picture the fig tree bearing olives and vines. For that one, it just made me think how, because they're so foreign, I guess, it's not what it should be. And when you really put an example of like something, I think, tangible like that, especially for the people it was written for,
right.
Maybe, for us, an
apple tree's not going to give you a pear.
Or peaches, and you're kind of like, yeah. Or, you're not going to.
Grapevine's not going to have cherries.
Exactly. And you're like, that's
the
true.
Fruit that is produced comes from what it is. Yeah. Like, at its core, a grapevine is a grapevine. It's going to bear grapes.
Yeah.
It is what...
It's not just what you see. Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so if somebody is pouring out curses on other people who are made in God's image, then you got to, according to N.T. Wright, who is the book that I was using to kind of help guide this discussion today, Wright says, then one must at least question whether that person's heart has been properly cleansed.
Well, because for that, it's not just about like pruning. You know what I mean? Like if you pull the peach, that's on an apple tree, like it's
something's wrong.
Something's wrong. Yeah. I mean, why is this tree producing what it's not supposed to?
Right. And so James is after consistency. So he wants people to follow Jesus with everything that they are, to be people who bless, not people who bless and curse.
I'll say this. Their heart has been properly cleansed. That makes me a little uncomfortable.
Why is that? What do you think that means? What does it mean to you?
Well, my first response is a question, like, what does properly cleansed mean? But I also it's not saying that they have a bad heart.
Right.
It's properly cleansed. Like, I don't know.
It's a high standard.
It is a high standard. Because I also think of, was this heart properly cleansed, or maybe this heart wasn't taught what it should have been?
I wonder.
Like if something is nurtured like in an unhealthy way, or just the only way, like if you go back to teaching, if all someone knows is to curse others or to look down on others, right. Or,
it's the age-old question of nature versus nurture.
It is.
Because, is there something to be said about being your authentic self?
There is.
I don't know. I don't think we ever want to intentionally hurt other people.
I hope not.
But some people do
But I think some people do intentionally want to hurt others with their words.
Yeah.
That is their goal.
Yeah. And one who would do that, according to James, that's a vine that's producing a different fruit. Like if you see a Christian tree, that's not the fruit it's going to produce. Yeah. So I can get on board with that.
Okay. Sorry.
Will you read what it says, the danger?
The danger, as always, is that people will take the bits of the message they want and quietly leave the real challenges to one side. But it can't be done. The spring must be cleansed so that only fresh, sweet water comes out. For this, we need help. That is what the gospel offers.
What do you think about that?
I like that. That answers my question. What does he mean by maybe they haven't been cleansed?
Right.
Yeah.
That through the power of the Holy Spirit, we can live in the way of Christ and act in the way that Christ calls us to behave toward one another, remembering that everybody is made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Everybody is a child of God.
I had a conversation just last night, about that very thing of how sometimes when we're going about our day, we think of these interruptions and we're like, oh, but what if we switched our perspective and we said, wait a second, this is, if God is in everything, is this an interruption from the Spirit? And how do I need to pause and recognize the divine in that moment?
Right. And as James reminded us earlier, to be slow to anger, quick to listen, slow to speak. That slow to speak is going to help us tame our tongues. Let's take a look at the last section of chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. I'll start, and then if you'll pick up on about halfway through.
Sounds good.
James asks, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom." We had a big discussion about faith and works in chapter 2. "But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish."
Whew. "For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace."
This is brilliant writing, I think, to go from, selfish, bitter envy, it's devilish, unspiritual, and then for James to give us this example of what wisdom, holy wisdom, looks like. As you were reading that, especially you have such a great soothing voice, to hear all of those, I felt a calmness come over my spirit. I'm not going to, it's been a hectic day. And to hear what wisdom from above is, what it reflects.
I love that, especially gentle. Like that just...
I love that. And in the book that I was reading, Wright talks about people, unfortunately, we hear about it so many times, who are walking around feeling fine, but they don't know they have some sort of disease that, is tearing them up from the inside out. And he compares that to living selfishly, jealously, with malice.
Ooh.
That you see people, how many times we see people walking around looking fine, but all of that stuff is eating at them, and it's, from the inside out. Jealousy and contention, envy, selfish ambition, a spirit that carps and criticizes, which can't let a nice word go by without adding a nasty one. I used to know a woman.
There's a story when we hear that giggle. Yes.
No names. But, it almost became a joke because it was almost impossible for her to say something nice without adding a little bit, another little thing. You look very nice today, but, see what she's wearing? It's we don't want to be that way. Will you read us as when someone...
Sorry, I'm just thinking of someone I know that does that a lot.
And here we are judging.
I know we are. Lord forgive us. When someone with that kind of spirit claims to be a Christian, James has a sharp response. That person is boasting and telling lies against the truth.
So James has talked a lot about things being from hell, being demon-led. That mindset kind of comes from the world of demons. Cynicism very often can look like wisdom, in that there's a ring of truth to it. Otherwise, an unbelievable lie isn't really a lie. It's farce. But a true, well-crafted lie is going to sound like truth.
Yeah.
And there's the temptation of falling for it or falling prey to it. So the challenge is but we also want to be truth tellers, true truth tellers. So we're going to find a way to tell the truth about the way the world is, because let's face it, there's a lot going on. And the wicked ways that people behave, or the ways that wicked people behave. But to address that without it turning into constant grumbling and complaining, or being divisive or hateful. Because at the end of the day, the world is still a beautiful place. There's a lot of beauty. There's love and generosity and just goodness.
Is that where hope comes in too?
I think so. And being peacemakers. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And James picks that up. He picks that lesson up at the end of this chapter, because we already know, we found out way early in this book, that God gives wisdom to those who ask for it. To those who ask in faith, God gives wisdom. And so will you read again? Here's what it looks like.
Yeah. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace.
Another translation says it's holy, peaceful, gentle, compliant, filled with mercy and good fruits, unbiased, and sincere. I don't know. That does give me hope. If we could uplift this type of correspondence, this type of communication with each other, what a better place what we would be spiritually, physically, emotionally, all the lees that you can think of.
Well, and I think some people, I think you're right, and I hope people don't hear this as like, that means, you have to sacrifice without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. We hear that in there. That doesn't mean that you still don't speak the truth. Or you still
I think it means exactly that you do speak you have to speak the truth.
Speak the truth.
I think when we're biased, we might tend to push aside what we know to be true, not necessarily what we want to be true, but what we know to be true for some cause or some person or some movement, but we know better. And so to be unbiased is to put aside what we want because, like the ends justify the means or something like that. Putting all that aside and being sincere and authentic. It's not being naive. It takes hard work to get to that point. It sounds like Pollyanna in a way. It sounds impossible. But James is saying if we are dedicated to our prayer life, to growing spiritually, to truly ask God in all faith for wisdom, that God will grant it, that God will give that wisdom.
And it is hard, like you just said, it's hard work.
Yeah.
This isn't easy.
Right. So Wright asks this question. He says, suppose you live in a village And suppose some of the people that you met every day were like the people in verse 16, which is the...
Okay.
And the other people are like the people in verse 17, which you read.
Okay.
Which would you rather see coming down the street?
The people in verse 17.
Who would you rather have as neighbors, right? And then he says, the question answers itself.
Yeah.
The challenge is how to become that neighbor for yourself. To be, so...
How to be the verse 17 neighbor.
Let's be the verse 17 neighbor, and not... I think it has to start with us. Because throughout, I keep talking about, well, I know a woman who did this, But
that woman is you.
No. What have I done?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I have to examine myself.
Yeah.
Pray for that wisdom. Pray for patience. Pray for, to persevere in the work of that. And it has to start with me. All of us, it has to start with the individual. Because we like to,
Well, have you ever, and I found myself doing this from time to time. I'm like, when did I become that grumpy neighbor?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about myself, not you. But any noise, I'm like, from my neighbors.
Yeah.
They probably don't like hearing the young and the restless at 7 o'clock in the morning every day. But I play it.
You do. You do.
Well, any final thoughts?
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. This has been fun.
This has been fun. I haven't,
even with a hard topic.
Yeah, and I haven't spent time in James in a while, and
it's one of my favorites.
I think I need to go back and watch the last couple weeks of All Church. I'm sorry I haven't been watching
That's
you guys,
okay.
but it's good stuff.
Yeah, James is real good. So hope that you found something that is going to be useful in your week, in your spirituality, your walk with Jesus, and be praying for wisdom to be that verse 17?
We want
18.
to be
Which neighbor do we want to be?
We want to be the verse 17
We want to be
neighbor.
the verse 17
Verse
neighbor.
17 neighbor.
We're going to double check just to make sure.
As we all strive.
I don't want us to be, the verse 17.
Okay, chapter 3, verse 17.
That's the neighbor we're going to be.
Yep.
And we can expect a harvest of righteousness.
Amen.
Amen. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time.
Bye.